Hello and welcome to Berufsoptimierer, the podcast that helps you optimize your career and achieve your professional goals. In this third English-speaking episode, I will be talking about job interviews and what you need to know to master your next job interview. I will be sharing with you 3 of my best and easy to learn tools that will help you convince the people sitting in front of you that you are the perfect candidate for their job offer. So, let's get started. Welcome to another episode in English. This is the 3rd episode I'm producing, and yes, I said in the first episode that I will be recording English-speaking episodes, and this was a test to see whether the people who are listening to this podcast find these episodes useful. And based on the feedback I've received via LinkedIn and also via email, yes, you convinced me. I will produce further episodes, and I'm already on the lookout for people who also want to do interviews in English. So I will maybe be talking to someone from the labor law section. So I hope she will give me some insight on labor law and what you need to know. And I will be talking to someone who has very deep experience working with international people and not just Europe. This person has traveled the world and worked in many different working environment. So stay tuned, and this is what we'll be sharing soon. If you are listening to this podcast the first time, let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm Bastian Hughes, and until 2016, I worked in recruitment for international companies in the automotive industry. In 2017, I ventured into my own career coaching and training business, where I've had the privilege to work with more than 1,000 people, assisting them in finding new jobs and navigating career changes. When I'm not working, you will find me exploring the beautiful Bavarian region of the Allgäu through hiking, mountain biking, and running. My mission for today's episode is help you master upcoming job interviews. And at the end of this episode, you will know how to prepare yourself. I will share with you my 3 favorite tools. And when you know and master them, job interviews will no longer be a challenge for you. Then we will be talking about how to deal with difficult questions and how to present your skills and your experience confidently. I will be sharing with you some of the most information, tips, and insights on job interviews based on my own professional experience as a recruiter and a trainer for international students and for my work as a career coach. Okay, let's dive in part number 1, how to prepare yourself. Most job interviews fail due to lack of preparation. And when I talk about preparation, it's not knowing everything about the company, knowing the people you will be talking to. These are things, let's say they are basic, okay? They are necessary to prepare for a job interview. But what I want to talk about when it comes to preparation is your performance. It's about what you will be talking about and how, and that's very important, how you will be talking about these things. So what do you think is more important in a job interview? Is it A, qualifications, or is it B, personality and competence? And if you tend to think that qualifications is the most important thing in a job interview, I'm sorry, they're not. Because, well, why have you been invited to the job interview? Based on personality and competence? Interviewers don't really know anything about your personality yet because they just have 2 sheets of paper. They have invited you because of your qualifications and your experience, and this is all in your CV. So once again, what is the aim in the job interview? Well, it's easy. Everything that you cannot read in a cover letter or a CV. It's about finding out competencies, find out the added value for the company, identify your motivation, and answer the question, do you fit into the team and the company? In terms of preparation, it's not knowing your CV in deep, because in the most situations, recruiters have read your CV. What is important is how to present your CV in a way that the company understands the added value. Before we do that, let's just quickly dive into the question what a typical structure of a job interview looks like. Well, it always starts by telling something about yourself. So I guess you've experienced this question quite often when interviewers say to you, so please tell me something about yourself. Please introduce yourself. And this is a moment that can be very stressful for most of the people when they are looking for a job. There will be questions about your career. So why have you decided to work there? Why did you change jobs here? Why is there a gap between this job and this job? Usually you will be talking about the position. And then in the end, questions are asked. And in the best situation is that a dialogue starts. At the end of the interview, you will be talking about salary, but be aware, it's not common if there are 2 or 3 interviews in a row to talk about salary in the first meeting. Okay, so here's a tip. If you haven't spoken about salary in the second or the third interview round, it's important that you start talking about it, because in Germany, companies tend to kind of dance around this salary question, and it can be very frustrating when you had your third or fourth interview. I had a client once, he had 7 interview rounds, and in the last interview round, they asked him what his salary expectation is. He said, what's in my application, so and so many thousand euros, and they say, I'm sorry, that's too much. That can be very frustrating. So at least the second or the third job interview should be the moment where you'll be talking about salary. Okay, and then the interview ends with next steps. So when are we going to come back to you? When, what are the next steps in the process, etc., etc. To master all these steps, there are 3 tools you need to know. And when you want to master the next job interview, these tools are very crucial. And fun fact, and that's what I like so much about these tools, all of this can be prepared and practiced in advance. And some of the tools might sound familiar to you, but the question always is, and this is what I experience also when I work with my coaching clients, they might know these tools, but have they practiced them, worked on them, carved out the most necessary things they want to say, they want the other person to hear? And especially, it's not only knowing these tools and maybe using these tools, it's also a way of how to use these tools. Okay, so what are the 3 tools? Number 1, for the introduction, the tool is called the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch is a tool that helps you explain who you are, what your skills are, and why you are in this job interview. This is actually the structure, answering 3 questions. And if you prepare this in advance and practice it, 100 times in front of the mirror, or for example, record an audio file and send it to your friends and relatives and ask them for feedback. If you practice this very well, it doesn't sound so cheesy and like a robot, okay? Because it has to come out naturally, and that's why it's so important to practice the elevator pitch. The second step is the so-called STAR tool. The STAR tool is actually a tool that on one hand helps you identify successes in your career, but on the other hand also helps you identify skills and competencies. And the most important thing about the STAR tool, especially when it comes to people who are not so familiar with talking about their experience, it's a technique that is also used in storytelling. Okay, so when you master the storytelling skill, listeners can easily follow and also understand and hear what their added value for the company is. And number 3, and it doesn't sound like a huge, amazing, wow tool, but number 3 is questions. Yeah, questions. Bastian, what's so special about questions? Well, questions, I mean questions that you ask. And it's not only questions like, how does the onboarding process look like? How's the team structured? Or what's the salary? Okay. Questions are a very powerful tool to also demonstrate how you've prepared for the job, how interested you are in the job. So it also shows your motivation, and also for yourself, really understanding what this job is about and what the expectations are. So practicing questions is key, actually, because it demonstrates so many different things. But before we jump into these tools, let's talk about several variations of a job interview. But fun fact, you can also use all these 3 methods for these different variations. So one variation, which I've also experienced a lot with my clients, is a task you have to work on. Something you have to prepare, a presentation, etc. When I recruited Susie, who does the work on these podcast episodes, Susie had to prepare a quick strategy on how we can expand and optimize our social media strategy, for example. Then there are so-called interview days. Interview days are actually you are at the company for the whole day. This is what my wife experienced. And you have several interviews. You go to lunch with the people. You talk to people from the team. And interview days are I think they are very, very positive because you spend a whole day in the company and really learn so many things. And it's really difficult for people to keep up a show for a whole day. So you really get to know these people. And then there are the assessment centers, but they don't have to happen so often because assessment centers, they are mostly common when it comes to governmental jobs. But most of the companies in Germany, especially when it comes to experienced jobs, they don't really use assessment centers anymore. Where it comes into place again is when it comes to leadership positions. But yeah, most of the jobs out there, they are not recruited with assessment centers. Okay, so we spoke about the 3 different tools. And before we dive into these, I want to talk to you about difficult questions. And I know some people struggle to answer interview questions in an effective manner. And yes, this can be due to a lack of preparation or nerves. So on one hand, when it comes to difficult questions, it's important to take your time, okay? Let's say they ask you something like, let's take the first question. Could you please quickly introduce yourself? The job is not like in a test situation or in an exam situation, in an orally exam, for example, where you really have to shoot out the answer. When it comes to difficult questions, you can always take your time to answer, to think them through and to answer. And what I've also experienced in my coaching practice is that there are not the one or these 3 difficult questions. The thing is, different people fear different questions. I had this client once. He got very nervous about the question, what he did after university. Because he didn't really have a plan after university. And he kind of tested different jobs and really didn't stay long in the jobs. And this question made him very nervous because he didn't really have a proper answer for that. But in the coaching situation, we worked on answering this question in an authentic and kind of real way. So he didn't have to lie or just tell any bullshit stories. And through this question was no longer difficult for him anymore. He knew how to react to these questions and what I also experience when I work with clients on difficult questions for them, these questions don't appear so often anymore in job interviews, because the people, I don't know what happens, if it's faith or whatever, but interviewers no longer ask these questions anymore, and they are no longer nervous when it comes to these questions. So what I want to say is, it's so crucial, also in terms of preparation, to ask yourself, okay, what kind of question could someone ask that hits me off the rail, okay, that makes me nervous, that makes me want to leave the room? What are these questions that provoke kind of a negative reaction in you? And if you identify these questions and work on them, then these questions are no longer a problem. Okay? So, but let's talk about two types of the most common questions. So on one hand, we have the information questions. And information questions are questions like, why did you apply? Why you? What do you know about our company? And these questions, they are focused on, of course, how well are you prepared for the job interview, but also focusing on motivation, especially when it comes to the question, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Okay, so these are informational questions or information questions that you can easily prepare. Situational questions, also called competence-based questions, they are questions that you can also prepare, but there's actually no right or wrong to these questions. For example, a question like, what do you do when a customer complains and becomes abusive? So the question is, or the aim of this question is, how do you react in certain situations? What competencies can be derived from this? And the much bigger aim is, imagine how you would react in your job in certain situations. So interviewers ask these questions to understand, to get a grasp of how you would deal with a customer, how you would deal with a colleague, how you would deal with your superiors. For example, when the question comes, how do you react when you disagree with your supervisor's decision? And as I say, there's no perfect answer. There's only your individual answer to these questions. And recruiters, they check immediately if you have learned something by the heart, or if it's something that and that's why I also don't give perfect answers to typical questions. They will know that this is an answer you have practiced, you have studied, okay, and you can just like a poem, you can just give the answer like it's a studied answer, and this is not authentic, and this is where it happens that most recruiters become skeptical. So so you need answers that come from your heart, that are your personal answers. And let's imagine that there's a question. It's difficult to answer a situational question because you have never experienced that situation before. Then you should always ask yourself, okay, where was a similar situation? Okay, maybe you weren't able to, to deal with a difficult customer, but maybe you had a different situation when you were in university, for example, or where you had to convince someone else. So there are always related stories to these questions, and your job is to find these related questions to get an idea of how you could answer to that question. If you would like to practice these questions, stay until the end of this episode, because then I will give you some information on how you and I could work together. Okay, so we've spoken about these 3 tools at the beginning, and now I want to show you how to present your skills and your experience confidently. And the first tool that we spoke about was the elevator pitch. And the elevator pitch, as I say, when you start working on your elevator pitch, it may sound very unfamiliar when someone says to you, so please introduce yourself, and you start saying your elevator pitch. You have to practice it a lot until it becomes natural. So what's the structure of the elevator pitch? And maybe if you after the structure, you rewind until the beginning of this episode, maybe you hear that how I start this episode when I introduced myself was quite similar. So when you create your elevator pitch, the 3 questions you have to answer to yourself is, who am I? What are my skills? And why am I here? And who am I is, of course, no philosophical question. It is answering what's your current situation? What are you doing currently? What are your responsibilities in your current job? Do you have leadership responsibility, for example? What are the current projects you're working on? So, for example, hi, I'm Bastian Hughes, and until 2016, I worked in recruitment, working for international companies in the automotive industry. And in 2017, I ventured into my own career and training business, where I've had the privilege to work with more than 1,000 people, assisting them in finding new jobs and navigating career changes. So this is kind of my first, my answer to the first question, who am I? The second was, what are your skills? So if you ask yourself, what are your skills? It's just trying to reflect, okay, the last 3 years I worked in this and this situation. And during that moment, I learned that I'm very good at blah, 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 blah. And by the way, this is also how you could answer the second part of the elevator pitch. So you could say something like, well, in the last 3 years, I've experienced that I'm very good with working in, intercultural projects, for example, based on my language skills in English, Spanish, French, and Chinese. I'm very good at understanding different mentalities and also bringing these mentalities together. And this is also something I've got when I asked my boss for feedback. This is also something I got as a feedback from my superiors. So this could be the second answer. Okay, so what are my skills? And if you don't know what your skills are, just try to reflect on the last couple of years, things that went well, things you did very good. And then question number 3, why am I here? Thank you very much for inviting me to this job interview today. I'm really interested in how company XYZ is structured when it comes to international projects. And I want to understand how this role of a project manager fits into this environment. And based on my experiences on skills, of course, I'm looking forward to demonstrate you how my person could fit into this position. So this is the third answer to the question, why am I here? So this is tool number 1, the elevator pitch. The second tool helps you also present your skills and experience confidently. It's the STAR technique. STAR is an acronym that stands for situation, task, action, and result. Okay, so let's practice this STAR technique, okay? Like I said, S stands for situation. So let's say the situation was you had to deal with a customer who was unhappy with your service. T stands for tasks. So the task was to reach out to this customer and convince him that you are still the best company in the world and he should be happy and he should buy more products from you. And the action were the things that you did to convince this customer. Okay, so let's say, first of all, you try to gather all the information on the customer. How many orders has he placed? What kind of products has he ordered? With what people has he spoke to? What kind of people has he spoken to before? And what stage is he when it comes to new products? What is actually the issue? Of course, what has happened? What's the problem? So all these things you researched before. Step number 2, you created some sort of a how-to plan. Okay, so question number 1, what is the question you will ask the client? what are potential answers, what is the next question you will ask, what are the potential answers, etc., etc., etc. So you make yourself a strategy, a structure on this phone call. Step number 3, you practice this phone call, I don't know, with someone in your family or with your partner. Step number 4, you called this person, you listened to the complaints, you were very empathetic and showed interest and helped the client also to understand what the current situation is and how you will deal with this situation. Action finished. And now the result, the R result was, customer was in the beginning or described his frustration. And due to the fact that you listened so well to the customer started saying that he has never experienced someone so compassionate before. And he also understands the situation why you couldn't deliver, for example. And he was willing to postpone the delivery date to another week. Yeah, the result was also that the customer was now convinced of the situation and happy to do further business with you. So this is how a STAR technique or a STAR story could look like, because we are still in the moment of storytelling. Okay, so this was a story, and I bet that you were able to follow this story and also imagine you being in this situation. And this is the magic about STAR, because when you start telling stories instead of examples, people are really in this story and can really imagine how you dealt with this problem and what the result was. And on the other hand, and that's a big advantage of STAR, is when you follow through each of these steps, you also kind of experience what kind of skills you have, okay? And what are kind of competencies you have. And now imagine you are here listening to this podcast episode in the moment of preparing for the job interview. You're kind of nervous and you don't really know how to convince them. Well, the first step to convince others is to be convinced of yourself. So imagine yourself practicing 2, 3, 4, 5 of these situations, preparing the story and reflecting on skills and experiences. What's your feeling when you sit in this job interview and you know you have these 5, 6, 7, 8 situations in your head? Okay, and when it comes to these situational questions, you have very good answers that demonstrate what kind of skilled, experienced person you are and what kind of a big value you are for the company. At the beginning, we spoke about the 3 tools, and first tool was elevator pitch, second tool was STAR, and the third tool was questions. And almost at the end of this episode, I also wanted to give you some examples of good questions that you should ask in your next job interview. Because as I said, questions demonstrate how well you are prepared and how motivated you are, and especially how skilled and competent you are. Imagine yourself, and this is key for these questions. So imagine yourself being a freelance consultant and you want to understand the problem the company has. So the questions you could ask is, for example, what are the biggest challenges in your team in the next months? What are the biggest challenges in this role? What is the status quo and where do you want to go? How is the success in this department measured? And a question for the end can be, how will you determine in 6 months that I'm doing a good job here? So these are just some of the questions that you should ask, also to really understand the expectations. And as I said, put yourself into the shoes of a consultant, try and understand the problem of your customer. And here's another fun fact. When you do that, when you see yourself as a consultant focusing on finding solutions to the problems of your customer, you don't see yourself as the kind of small interviewee candidate person who says, please, please, please give me a job. You see yourself eye to eye and in a respectful and professional way when you sit in front of the people from the company. And also, it gives you a different feeling. You know, when it comes to job interviews, being nervous is fine because, I mean, this job interview is important, right? And imagine not being nervous. Imagine not caring about this job interview. How would you prepare your job interview then? So being nervous is totally fine. But when you know these are my stories, this is my prepared elevator pitch, and these are the questions I want to ask to really understand how I can help them, then it's a completely different situation and you're perfectly prepared for the next job interview. If you want to learn about what recruiters expect when it comes to your application documents, then check out my first English episode, episode number 276. You will also find a direct link in the description to this episode. And if you have any further questions or need personalized guidance in your job search journey, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can send me your message to hallo, HALLO, at Berufsoptimierer.de or connect with me on LinkedIn. You can just type in my name and then you will find me and then just send me a message. I look forward to being in contact with you. And I'm here to support and assist you in making your dream of working in Germany a reality. Additionally, if there's something you would like me to talk about, or if you have some ideas on what I should be covering next in this podcast, please feel free to drop me an email and I'm happy to record this episode for you. Thank you for joining me today and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Stay tuned for more English speaking episodes coming your way. Bis bald. See you soon.